of Adjustment meeting to order. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce the Board of Adjustments. We'll start with Harry Clark.
My name is Harry Kohler.
I'm Dick Schneider.
Anil Vera.
John Avent.
Kathy Slagle.
Emily Boyette, Secretary.
Thank you. First order of business is approval of last month's meeting, minutes of last month's meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I move to accept the minutes as written.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Absent.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries
With one abstention.
with one abstention. Our first order of business is BOA 18.10.
Okay, that's
Make
the
sure that's on.
hospital.
Is yours on? Did you turn it back
Yeah.
on? Okay.
And good afternoon,
Good.
Mr. Chairman and members of the board. And so, case number 18.10, this involves a piece of property along Porter Lane, which is currently a minimally developed piece of right-of-way that intersects with Ingleside Drive. And Chairman and board members, for the benefit of everyone watching, we have added to our slideshow to make it easier to follow along. And so if you'll notice in the very first slide here, we have the zoning area marked, and you'll notice the nearby streets, Ingleside Avenue and Middle Street are marked. You'll see the subject property is outlined in a black outline. And then you'll also notice, and this is in your packet as well as on the screens, we have the aerial image where we've outlined the subject property in green, marked the site as well as marked the streets. And you'll notice some of the nearby structures and the nearby uses that we'll identify here in just a moment. And members of the board, this is a screenshot of this is a screenshot showing, this is borrowed from Google Street View. And so Porter Lane is actually on the left of the image, and you notice it runs parallel with the existing church building. And of course, this is on Ingleside Drive. This is looking east from the image. And we'll introduce the details of the project. And board members, I'll have to do a little bit of reading tonight here, so make certain that everyone has all the background information. And so the request is from Ms. Doyle and Mr. Doyle and Ms. Joellen Porter. And this request is via appeal and subject to conditions, the allowance of retail, restaurant, and conference facilities as allowable uses for the property located along Porter Lane. The subject property is zoned in an M1 light industrial district and also located in the medical overlay district. For this type of zoning, in addition to the uses that are allowed by right, the uses for a restaurant, a conference type of facility, or a retail are allowable uses, but they are required that the applicant approach the Board of Adjustment and received its authorization to allow those types of uses on the property via this appeal process. So the subject property is zoned M1 light industrial, and as we talked about earlier, does not allow a restaurant use, and we cite the section of the zoning ordinance right there. It's also located in the medical overlay, and so pursuant to the article you see in your slide, conference facilities, restaurant and conference facilities are allowed on appeal in the medical overlay district. And you'll notice we give some background information on the appeal conditions that are available. And you'll notice item number 3 right there. It lists several different types of uses that can be approved through this process. So we'll move on to our analysis recommendation. Currently it is a forested, undeveloped piece of property. It's about 250 feet east of Ingleside Drive. And there is an existing Faith Temple Church of God church near the property, on the adjoining property. We don't have we did not see a recorded plat on file for this property. However, there is a nearby slide recorded June 5th, 2002 for a nearby subdivision that we reference right there. And it describes the describes the right-of-way width as narrow, 20-foot wide in that area, and various background information that we include in here. And we talk again about the request process to allow the restaurant type of use. And a little bit less cluttered aerial map right here, again showing the property, its proximity to the church facility, and the nearby streets. What we wanted to do here in this excerpt, the red and white dashed line is the outline of the medical overlay. This is not the entire medical overlay, but just the southern portion, and we wanted to make certain that we reflected that this property is within the medical overlay. Its inclusion in the medical overlay is the allowance for this process to be heard as an allowable use inside an M1. We also wanted to mark some of the nearby uses. There's a Burger King fast food restaurant in close proximity. There's also a Holiday Inn Express. We also wanted to note for you here the unzoned properties that are nearby, so therefore they are not included in the medical overlay. So we'll continue with the analysis recommendation. What we've done here is excerpted each of the criteria the zoning ordinance references for this type of application. And so beginning one, compliance with the comprehensive plan. And the verbiage we've provided here basically explains the medical overlay and how it is for a support function for Thomas Hospital. And though the comprehensive plan doesn't go specific details and guidance for determining the level of support to the hospital of a proposed restaurant, catering, conference facility, as a function of the proximity to the site, it can certainly support the hospital. Compliance with other approved planning documents. We do not have an active development application for the site at this time. And just to summarize the analysis right there, we wanted to note for this board, as well for the applicant, to understand that any necessary right-of-way improvements that may be necessary to Porter Lane, that would actually be a function of the Baldwin County Highway Department. And so we wanted to make certain that the board and the applicant were advised of those requirements. Getting into more of the detailed criteria. And one, the character of the surrounding property, including any pending development activity. And so here's where we note again, the adjoining properties west, north, and east of the subject property are all zoned M1. Their uses are consistent with M1 and or the medical overlay district. We noted, as we stated earlier, there's an existing fast food restaurant approximately 370 feet northeast of subject property. There's an existing hotel approximately 170 feet east of subject property. The northern adjoining property appears to operate as a type of an entertainment facility. So staff believes an additional restaurant will not affect the character of the zoned areas north of Porter Lane. As far as infrastructure, which is item E, and we talked, as stated previously, there are a number of existing facilities, facilities near the subject property, west, north, and east of it. There's a single-family residence and unzoned property in the ETJ immediately south of subject property. Adequate infrastructure exists to support the existing facilities. The applicant is advised to contact Fairhope Public Utilities to determine any applicable aid to construction costs that might be required for any upgrades to provide utilities to the use they may desire in the future. And then finally, impacts on natural resources, including the existing conditions. As we stated several times previously, the subject property is undeveloped forested land. Staff strongly recommends the applicant contact the City of Fairhope Building and Public Works and Utilities Departments, discuss the development activities on the site for the desired use that is to come, because we encourage and will assist applicants with pre-development activities to make certain that they're advised on the requirements related to drainage, waste collection, and utilities. And as we talked about earlier, also be advised about right-of-way permits through the Baldwin County Highway Department. And then the final two criteria, noise, traffic, visible intrusions, and we want to alert to the applicant, make certain they're aware that depending upon the development they wish to place upon the site, that may possibly trigger a site plan review. And you see the location in the zoning ordinance where it's referenced. And if a site plan review is not required, there's a built-in planning and zoning review that occurs with building plans. And so we want to make certain that the applicant is aware that depending upon the size of their development, it may could possibly trigger a site plan review. And then we reiterate that again in item J, again about the site plan review and also building plan reviews, and that they're encouraged to contact staff as they develop their plans for developing the site. And so, Chairman and board members, that brings us to a staff recommendation where the staff recommends approval of the appeal to allow retail, restaurant, conference facility uses at the subject property. And before we turn it over to the applicant, I'm certainly happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This time, I'd like the applicant to come forward, please. We'll state your name. Or-
Welcome to flip back to the end of the slides, if that'll help.
Oh, okay.
Doyle Porter,
Joe Ellen Porter.
husband and wife, and owners of
Property.
the property, and we're actually submitting a request for approval.
And do you want to make a presentation of like what you're wanting to do?
The idea is to put in a restaurant-type facility, for the most part barbecue, but also perhaps a commissary
Kitchen.
kitchen and food truck accommodations, and perhaps a small amphitheater that would allow for high school bands to come in and play and compete and that kind of thing. So the idea is to get the schools involved as well. But basically a restaurant facility for the most part.
Are there any questions?
Yeah, I have one.
Yes, sir.
Do you intend at any point to ever put a bar in there?
Never.
No, sir.
No alcohol?
No alcohol.
And will this be managed by by yourself, or will there be someone from the hospital?
It will be managed by us.
You'll be doing it?
That's
Yes.
correct. Yes, sir.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
All
Right, thank you.
right. Okay.
Quick question.
Oh.
If this is approved, will it be approved for all of those facilities that they mentioned?
So, Chairman and board members, just to reiterate, the approved use, the uses that will be allowed that are considered by this application are retail, restaurant, and conference facility. Obviously, when those uses are approved, when any type of development is then brought before the city, we would review it for its intended use once the development process begins and determine its compliance with the uses approved as a part of this Board of Adjustments case.
Is that-
Where's the parking going to be put for this? We don't have any picture or anything.
And so, Chairman and board members, I apologize if I didn't illuminate that better prior. There is not a development application currently associated with this site. This is strictly for allowing uses. And so that's why, that's why I tried to illuminate earlier that possibly you could have a site plan review that would be a separate document reviewed by the Planning Commission and the City Council, should the development on the site trigger it. So it would be at that point that we would know the answers to parking, drainage, lighting, screening, buffering, et cetera, et cetera.
So just to make it clear to myself, so if we approve it or disapprove it, then if it is approved, then it comes back to the City of Fairhope Planning and Zoning Department, or to your department, and then y'all do the reviews on parking and.
Yes, sir, that's correct. We would, depending upon the intensity of the development, there could be, at a minimum, you're looking at a building permit that Planning and Zoning would perform its customary planning and zoning review as a part of the building permit process. Depending upon the size of the development, it could very well have a formal site plan review that in addition to the building permit, you would have possibly have a site plan review that would be reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission and the City Council. So a lot of words to say, yes, sir. Both staff and the various organizations within the city would review that development when that development's brought forward for consideration.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. So this was for retail restaurant conference center. The applicant mentioned amphitheater. Where does that fit in?
If that is brought to us at the development stage, we would evaluate its compliance with the uses listed in this action.
But what we're approving today, are we approving an amphitheater?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. You are not considering any development activities at this time.
We're approving retail, the possibility of retail restaurant conference center.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That is what that is what the applicant and staff are requesting approval of today. And as we talked about just a moment ago, the development process would have its own review where we would thoroughly vet the applicability of the desired uses.
And the entrance to this is only on that Porter Lane. It would not come in off of any other road, Middle Street.
And Chairman and the board members, I do not, I wouldn't wish to, I don't want to speak for the applicant, and they're certainly welcome to return to clarify that. What I would say there at the staff level is that would be evaluated when they go through the right-of-way improvement process with the Baldwin County Highway Department to determine the extent of improvements necessary to gain access to the development, whatever the development becomes.
Just one more question. How far does Porter Lane go?
So, sir, it is the right-of-way, the entire right-of-way, and if you look at the image upon the screen here, and if you'll notice the arrow balloon marking Porter Lane, that's its beginning on the west side, so its western terminus intersects with Ingleside. And that right-of-way actually traverses west to east all the way to Greeno Road.
Where?
It goes all the way to Greeno Road.
Okay.
Yes, sir, it goes all the way to Greeno Road. The right-of-way goes, and again, we do not have and are not considering any type of development activity at this time, so certainly they would, the applicant would go through the engineering process to determine how much right-of-way would need to be improved to gain access to the site and to what extent.
And is Porter Lane open south of this, or let's see, that'd be west of this property? It looks like it ends. I went out and looked at it, and it looks like it ends right after about, I don't know, 150 feet or so.
And Chairman and board members, typically staff do not leave the right-of-way when we're investigating a project like this, and because of nearby private property, I did not personally go traverse its entire length. But however, we're certainly welcome to ask the applicant how far it goes and how much of it can be traversed via vehicle. That would certainly be in order if we wanted to ask the applicant to clarify that.
All right, I'll ask the applicant.
Could you please repeat the question, sir?
It's Porter Lane.
That's
right
correct.
Now, the lane goes down on your property there about, I'm going to guess, 150 feet or thereabouts.
That's
And,
correct.
I wonder, will it be necessary for the city to put in the rest of the right-of-way, or how is it going to work? Just end there?
From my understanding, that's going to be something that we would have to request from the county. And as it stands right now, the property, there's a resident adjacent that actually uses that property. So there's, I own a piece of property adjacent or across the street from the property that we're planning to develop, eventually plan to develop. But there's 2 residences in place right now, and then there's 3 other property owners beyond our property. So I think at some point in time, it would go beyond but not necessarily all the way
What's
to
the
Greeno.
next street that it would intersect?
Greeno.
You know?
It would
Greeno.
be Greeno.
Greeno?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. And if I can point out, the property is undeveloped, and as it stands, the idea was, before we started doing any development whatsoever, it was to make sure that we could come to the board, get approval for making the appropriate activity happen, and then at that point, consider some development. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I'd like to open the public portion of the meeting. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak for or against the project? Okay, I'll open and close the public portion. I'll open it for the board members. If there's any questions, additional questions? If not,
None by me.
I'd like to have a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
The approval.
I'll make a motion, particularly if it's barbecue. I like barbecue. I'd like to make a motion to approve application 18.10.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor? We're going to take a roll call. Emily?
Kohler,
Aye.
Vera,
Aye.
Avent,
Aye.
Slagle.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our second order of business is BOA 18.11. Beaufort, will you explain?
And, Mr. Chairman and board members, thank you for having me before you again. And so case 18.11, this is for a piece of property on 301 Magnolia. It's related to a pending development on 301 Magnolia Avenue. The specific request involves some residential units that are currently proposed that will actually fall along North Church Street. And so, again, Chairman and board members, it will take quite a number of words to describe it adequately, so please bear with me. As you see on the screen, and for the benefit of everyone watching, again, as we do with most of these items, you'll have the area marked in a black outline on your left map that's showing the zoning classification. And so this is Zone B2. It is within the Central Business District. And of course, we have the area marked with a white outline in the aerial photograph on your right, and with both North Church Street and Magnolia Avenue marked. And so we'll go through the basic background information. And so the request is related to the proposed residential units running upon North Church Street that are likely, the units themselves are likely to be a component of a future subdivision, and we'll have a drawing of the site that you'll see here very shortly. B2 General Business District is the zoning classification located within the Central Business District, so it's within the CBD. The developer is Magnolia Church LLC, and Mr. Vance McCown is with us here tonight to speak on behalf of the applicant. The background, the city ordinance background related to this is in Article 4, Section B, and the various subparagraphs you see right there. And it involves dwelling units in the Central Business District shall provide the required parking. It shall be located behind the building, screened from the public rights-of-way, and have a direct pedestrian connection to the primary building entrance of the public right-of-way. And so the subject case requests allowance of a screen parking on Church Street on that frontage only. And the applicant has noted here that the conditions of the subject property include a grade differential across the site that's approximately 15 feet. And the applicant's indicated to staff the use of retaining walls and terrace building areas make it difficult to have vehicle access to the rear of the Church Street frontage lots. So gaining rear parking is required by the Central Business District, and the applicant's explaining they're having some difficulty complying. So the applicant states the indicated conditions preclude reasonable use of the land because the rear parking as required for residential use presents an extraordinary use of land for the circulation. And so they included supporting documents that you'll see on the next slide. And to frame it for you, we'll go ahead and move to the next slide here, and we may back up just a moment here. And so the three residential units are in the upper left-hand corner of the drawing. We have three of those shown right there. And then as a part of the greater potential development, and Mr. McCown can explain in greater detail, You have also a proposed parking area and two other commercial units fronting on Magnolia that could possibly also be mixed-use units as well. And if we back up just a moment here, and just a brief note, I backed up here in the various articles regarding the CBD that businesses in the CBD overlay are encouraged to provide off-street parking facilities for commercial uses. And so that may possibly be an element of the other two units running on Magnolia. We have a couple of photographs. We have a few photographs of the site. And so this one is looking east toward the subject property. This is from the west side of North Church Street. And here, looking to the northeast, from the same position, from the same vantage point from which the photograph was taken. And then here, this is right along the sidewalk along Magnolia Avenue. This is looking almost perfectly north. And to frame it for you for reference purposes, the 52 North Church Street, the residential development, is in the photo beyond, north of subject property. And from this photograph is taken from the adjacent property east of the subject property looking back to the northwest. And so that property line falls roughly within the tree line that you see there in the upper left-hand corner of the photo. And so here we've taken a screenshot. This was derived from the topographic maps from the county's map viewer, and this shows the 15-foot grade differential that the applicant was talking about. If you start, those are 1-foot interval topo lines in the drawing. So if you start in the upper left-hand corner and go down to the lower right-hand corner, so from northwest to southeast, you can count the topo lines and see the 15-foot differential. And so if we look at the variance criteria, the first one, of course, they're extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property because of its size, shape, or topography. And so we note here the background information that visibly the extraordinary, exceptional topographical conditions is not necessarily visible. And then we note the grade differential that we mentioned over there on the right side of the page. The property is slightly more than a half acre in size, almost a square property. It's slightly longer north to south. You'll also see the applicant clarified the hardship created by the topography of the site affects the grading. And he also noted too, the applicant also noted that the finished elevation of the 20-spot parking area would be approximately 10 foot higher than the finished floor elevation of the 3 residential units. So, and what we noted here, we certainly understand, staff understands the conceptual need to allow the front screen parking for the residential units on Church Street and do not necessarily object to that screen parking. We don't believe at this time we have sufficient evidence at this time to demonstrate the extraordinary exceptional conditions pertaining to the size, shape, and particularly topography of the lot at this time. We certainly understand it's being designed right now. And Chairman and board members, in your packet, I needed to make for item B, I needed to make the following revision. There is a Scrivener's error in there that did not make it to your packet. What's on the screen, what's on your screens right here is how it should read. The red strike through is to be removed. The blue text is how it should read. And this is talking about the application of the ordinance for this particular piece of property would create an unnecessary hardship. So if we apply the ordinance, is there a hardship? And the zoning ordinance notes that financial hardship is not a justification for variance. And so what staff noted is that the requested variance is in relation to the residential uses. Each unit would likely have its own lot created by a subdivision that we expect to see in the future. We mentioned here the dimensions of the property do not prevent the reasonable use of the property for residential purposes, but it's not clear how the site's topography cannot be graded and the proposed building orientation cannot be modified to allow the rear parking required by the zoning ordinance. And then the final two conditions are peculiar to the particular piece of property. And we basically reiterate the statements from Section B about the size, shape, and topography and the requirement for to demonstrate the requirement for a hardship. Item D here explains relief if granted would not cause substantial detriment to the public good and impair the purposes. Again, we kind of reiterate items B and C here about that, about the conditions presented. What we want to note here is that we'll request the applicant to provide some follow-up information with some additional engineering drawings, better describing how the hardship is caused because of the topography, and how it's best mitigated by allowing the front screen parking in lieu of grading the site to allow the rear parking called for by the zoning ordinance. And so therefore, our staff recommendation is for this request to be tabled for additional study. And we just want to reiterate that staff certainly understands the proposed development for subject property is still undergoing engineering design. We recognize that detailed engineering data may not have been available at the time the variance request was submitted. And we request the applicant provide sufficient engineering data and drawings to support the assertion of the size, shape, and specifically topography of the lot creates a hardship according to the article of the zoning ordinance you see referenced right there. And what we'll ask for a deadline of the 10th of September to provide that to staff, so that way we can prepare a staff report and prepare a staff recommendation for the September 17th Board of Adjustments meeting. And we'll also request the assistance of the Public Works Director to review any engineering details in that process. And so, Chairman and board members, again, a lot of information. I had to do a lot of talking here before we invite the applicant to speak before the board. I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay. Can I ask a question, Mr. Chairman? So the variance is strictly because the residential units, for one, and the residential units does not meet the regulation about it has to have rear parking and a screened front.
Yes, sir, and Chairman and board members, to zero in, the central, this is an element of the central business district part of the zoning ordinance that requires the parking be furnished and that it be rear. To mitigate the hardship the applicant is illuminating for staff and the board, they request to mitigate that by having front parking but having it screened. So as you'll see in the drawing here is that the representative vehicles shown there are actually located within garages. So they would be screened behind garage doors. So it would be front parking, but it would be screened. And we stated a couple times in the background that staff does not necessarily object to that, but the issue is, how do you get there? What is the approval process to get there? The only method other than a zoning ordinance change would be a text amendment to the zoning ordinance, would be to go through the variance process, which requires demonstrating a hardship. And so that's why we're asking for some additional information from the applicant, table it, get some additional information from the applicant, and consider it again at the next or a future meeting.
Look,
Go ahead.
I got this.
Okay.
I'm gonna play a little couple of questions. On Church Street, across the street, which is the western side, what's across there?
So
I
you,
can't remember.
Houses.
Yes, sir.
Houses.
Yes, sir.
So the residential here is going to face houses across the street.
Yes, sir.
So the compatibility of it is somewhat similar.
Yes, sir.
Except these look more like a townhome concept than a house, but it's has the same flavor as a residential.
Yes, sir.
Residential and residential. And then in the central business district, if I remember right, if you have a business, it has to be a work-live type situation where your businesses are downstairs and living upstairs, or just strictly business?
So, and we can certainly, and that is a good question for the applicant. As we as staff understand the drawings as submitted, the 3 units in question are strictly residential units. and because they're strictly residential units, the CBD requirement forces forces to the requirement to require parking, and then two, that it be rear parking. And as and board members, as Mr. Avent pointed out, west of subject property, those are residential units that are just outside of the central business district.
So this property is the edge of Central Business?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But
So
the parking that's shown on the site plan, that's for the business?
and that will be a question, that'll be a question that we can propose to the applicant. But based upon the drawings we have, we believe those are related to a future, possibly a multiple occupancy or maybe a mixed use for the two units on the south side. And so that is what we believe those are for. And certainly Mr. McCown can clarify that for us, for the board.
Why can't they bring the parking on the other side of the building and use that parking lot? You see what I'm saying? Instead of having the parking lot there, just flip it around to
Yeah.
the other side.
And Chairman, board members, I certainly wouldn't want to speak for the applicant, not knowing the details of what they're trying to do to develop the site. So we would not be privy at this point to the engineering challenges they would face. Yes, sir. We just simply would not be privy to that at this time. And I think you can see the theme here. That's why we wanted to have the opportunity to table it and give the applicant the opportunity to give us some more information. So we certainly wanted to make certain that they had that opportunity.
One other question. The proposed commercial buildings that are shown, the two of them, because it's in the central business district, they do not have to have behind the street parking. They are absorbed in the city central business district. So this is above and beyond to propose this parking lot in the back?
So, yes, ma'am, and to all the board members. The wording of the ordinance is very clear that if you have a strictly commercial use, that on-site parking is not required. Now, there is some language in the zoning ordinance that says it's encouraged where it's available, but it's not required. Now, the alternative would be, though, however, if those units were mixed-use units, then they would contain a dwelling for which parking would have to be provided.
I see.
And we certainly, and again, I'll restate it again for the fourth or fifth time, we certainly understand the challenge of trying to develop a site, and certainly understand mixed uses are encouraged by the zoning ordinance, so we certainly understand, what the applicant's trying to do here, and want to give them the opportunity to give us more information before we proceed.
But then again, does the staff think that this is compatible with the use?
As far as the residential units that are the issue at hand and having the screened parking where it is, the staff does not object to that portion of it. Not at all. And like Mr. Avent was talking about earlier, you can see some continuity with the non-CBD purely residences to the west side. So we do not see an issue with that portion of it. It's just the vehicle by which we get there requires a variance.
But I'm sorry, Buford, it's been a long day.
No problem, sir. I understand.
The 3 units are going to be subdivided with a common wall, but they're basically, it's going to be fee simple with the piece of land that's going to go around the property. Is that allowed? The residential with the lots and everything, assuming that you had parking behind it and met all that, the 3 residential units, is that allowed for that zoning?
Do not see an issue with that. Do not see the issue with that.
So
I think
it's just strictly parking and screening and all that?
Yes, sir. The issue at hand here is parking and screening and how we can get to a method of allowance for that parking and screening.
A question. So your definition of screening here is a garage door?
It would be screened from the public view, yes, ma'am. In this case, the proposed method of screening is parked behind a garage door.
And in front of that garage door, will there then be also driveway room to park a couple of cars?
Well, they will
It
certainly.
looks like it.
They will certainly have driveway access, yes, ma'am.
So you could have cars or not, you could use it as storage behind the screened garage door and keep your cars outside.
Well, that would be a question for, this is a development application we do not have at this time, so we would evaluate that at the time of receipt of the actual development application related to this site.
Well, my point is, though, that in fact, they may not be screened, they may just park their cars out in the driveway.
Yes, ma'am, that is definitely a
In that
possibility.
case, it's defeating the purpose of what we're trying to approve.
And what we at the staff level would do is when we do see the development application related to this site is there is some language in there where we can determine if there are any deed restrictions or any regulatory advice, any regulatory elements to that site. And so that would be one of the questions that we would ask of the developer when we review the development application.
I just don't know how that would be enforced.
That's
Yeah.
correct. Now,
Well, and that's my question. I mean, I
Yes.
can certainly see that happening. I see it in all the subdivisions. People store all their stuff in the garage, and they don't have room for their cars, so the cars stick out on the driveway forever.
well, and board members, I will confess to you right now that is not a topic for consideration for this entity at this time. That is certainly understood, and we certainly take it under advisement, but that would be contemplating a regulatory authority that the city really does not have at this time. And I would think that would fall under some type of deed restriction if the developer, the eventual property, the owner wanted to have it. But then you talk about having to establish an HOA of some type for this property. And so I don't have a good definitive answer for that at this time because we do not have a development before us for consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Am I looking at this correctly? The garages are going to have a driveway, all three of them, right?
Correct.
Okay, and the width of this property, or of each one of these, is about 20 feet, is it? 20-some feet?
$57, I do believe.
The driveway, Heath.
Well, it says 23 feet on the one in the middle,
For the driveway.
For the driveway.
for the driveway, yeah.
Enough room for two cars to get into the driveway.
That's what?
It's enough room for two cars to get in and out.
Right, which will be a driveway, right?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, so you basically are not going to have any parking on the street in this area. Is that not correct?
There's no parking on the street there. Because the street is too narrow, have off-street parking.
And so members of the board, if you look at this photograph right here, if you look at this photograph of the site, so this area is the approximate location of the 3 residential units. Now, if we back up one photo and you look at the drawing, if you look at the drawing in your package, and we'll flip back to it in just a moment, a part of and a function of the greater development, based upon the drawings we have right now, is to add some on-street parking on the west side at the corner of Church and Magnolia. But as far as in front of the residential units that you see in that photograph right there, there would not be any on-street parking.
So it's all right to park on the corner, but it's not all right to park in front of the houses, according to the regulation.
The don't have a good answer for that right now, Mr. Avant, but your curveball is accepted.
The blow up, if you look at the larger scale drawing that's at the back of your packet, it shows that those driveways are 20 feet wide.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Boyett.
And so the trees, is the ordinance allows for the cutting down of the trees? Or-
Not to mitigate it.
And understand too that, that is possible. Now, do you have, and board members, if you'll apologize for me just a moment, in your packet, do you have the elevation view rendering of the site? Okay. In the supporting documents, yes, sir. Very good, very good. So I will pass that as far as if there's the intention to preserve the trees. I'll pass that along to the applicant to clarify their intentions, to determine if they intend to try to preserve those trees or if they intend to remove them and replace them with additional landscaping. Now, of course, this one, there's a process by that. There's a process for that where we can get the city horticulturalist involved. And again, we do not have a development application before us for consideration at this time. But I'd certainly address that to the applicant.
If I'm looking at this properly, isn't there a big home on that property right now?
Small home.
If you'll look at the photo we have on the screen right now, that is the existing structure on the property. And I apologize, I don't know its square footage, but perhaps the applicant can provide that.
And looking at this, what street, no, go back to the other one. What street am I on?
This photograph is taken from Magnolia, looking north toward the property. This is actually standing in the sidewalk on the north side of Magnolia.
On Magnolia.
Yes, sir.
If this were to get approved, is that parking lot, you're going to be able to handle traffic? Certainly, it doesn't look like you could get 2 cars through there. That don't look like 30, 40 feet, 30 feet anyway.
And so board members, we are not considering any development activities at this time. We're just simply considering a variance to allow the parking as shown in just the residential units. This entire development would be a future application that we would consider. This appears to be a multiple occupancy project that we would receive and review, and it's very likely this would also have it could very well have a formal site plan review as well. So it would be inappropriate for me to comment upon any type of design issues on those parking areas at this time.
Okay,
This is a
thank you.
commercial.
Thank you. This time I'd like the applicant to make a presentation, please. State your name.
And you can flip back and forth the slides if that help.
Hello, my name is Vance McCowan. Nice to meet y'all.
Nice to meet
you.
It's cold back there.
Cold up there.
Let me see if I can answer, because of my memory, that some of the things that came up. I think, Ms. Legel, Kathy, you asked about parking in the driveway. That was one. And then I think you mentioned the parking for the future development, which is not necessary. It's just it's an amenity to the development to improve the value of the development and to make more attractive for the use on Magnolia. Also, I think in the packet there's an elevation that was drawn that shows you, hopefully gives you an indication of the quality of what we're trying to develop there. If you look at the property next door, I've got some other photographs also that were not in the packet. I'd like to just show that to you if that's okay. Individual, I can just show it to you on my phone. But so when we made the application, and I'm a contractor, frustrated engineer, architect. My father was a designer. My son's an architect. And so what I see in this plan, obviously I can certainly appreciate the fact that if it's not what you do all the time, it's not as obvious. And so when we were talking about this, let me show you what I just did quickly. Can I show this to you?
Absolutely.
So if you establish.
So let's do this. Let's speak it into the.
Yeah, okay.
For record purposes, and then we can share this with the
Right.
members.
So what I've done is I've done a quick grading plan or finished floor elevation determination plan after we spoke. I've been, I'm going to say, visualizing this development for about a year and a half. That's my office on the corner there right now for my construction company. And we don't want to force the development. We want the development sort of to become, come to us based on what Fairhope, what would be nice for Fairhope and what it would be an attractive development. We've had a bank ask us, we've had a restaurant ask us, we've had multiple requests for development that all fit within the central business district. We actually just finished the development as a contractor on Pine and Section Street where the Cactus Canteen and the new pizza place is, and called Section Place. So I'm aware of what the hardships of trying to force a restaurant or something in the central business district. I don't mean force, but the requirements of dumpsters and other truck deliveries and everything else, I don't see that on Church Street, frankly, even though it's permitted in the central business district for the best use of that property. So here's what I did. If you come down the street, I set this elevation at, and well, there's also a height restriction in the central business district. I think it's just been changed to 40 possibly. So we will probably have to step the development down Magnolia and have individual elevations of some type, but that's to come. And so, if you see, this is what we would, 509, we'd step each occupant 2 feet as we come down the street. 509, 507, 53, and 1.
Okay.
All right. In doing that, the parking in the rear would have to be a complementary elevation to the first 2 suites here. So I set a finish elevation of 506 around the perimeter, and I detain the water by putting a central catch basin there. We can put an orifice plate, have whatever I'm not sure there's actually a stormwater management requirement in the central business district anyway, but we could bring it out, and I was incorrect, there is a storm drain here on the street. We could bring down and tie it in there. So we could actually collect all of our storm water through this. But what that does, that puts this parking up at 506. If I come around to the front, which is the northern end, we're way down at 497. So I would set this rear patio at 496 and the parking lot's at 506. There's the 10 feet. So what I'm referring to is trying to put a garage in the back is almost improbable because of the 10-foot grade difference. You'd be coming in at the second floor elevation with your car if you put it in the back. That Buford has asked that we postpone this to the next month. That's fine. We're not in a drastic hurry. I think he would want me to show this in more detail, the engineering department, and get there, because I don't think, but I know that the reason for that is that it can't be just a subjective hardship or recommendation. It has to be an objective hardship to developing those 3 parcels on the front. So that pretty much, we're in agreement there. I went and met with them a month or 2 ago, and they gave me the criteria of how to proceed with this. And so I think, as he said, without him stating something that's not from the planning department, they are in agreement with the concept of what we're doing. We do, though, have to go through this for this reason. So with respect to the parking in the driveway, that's actually right of way. In other words, if we move there was one other item, the trees. We move the front of the, if I could show you on the drawing, I'd be happy to do that.
Here. In other words, they can ticket you there.
So there's 7 feet or so from the property line to the front of these units. We did that to protect the trees. We have no intention of removing these 3 trees along Church Street, and or any of the trees on the right of way. And we actually created the design based on the trees so we could get an entrance, a parking entrance. So that's the reason for that. So just like these parking spaces that we hope to, we propose in this development, that's in the right of way. That would add more parking for the city downtown central business district. No different from somebody parking right there, right there, right there. If they did that.
But the corner parking is allowed.
Excuse me?
I said, that would be, assuming that all this was business, this would be allowed.
I think the city would encourage.
Yeah, but it would
private
also be allowed by right,
Yeah, it's in the
with
right-
this, yeah,
that's right.
exactly.
So we
And
would be
that
adding.
was my point, was the
Yeah, in other
difference.
words, we're
So.
effectively adding 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 parking spaces to the central business district if we did this. You know, so,
Not screened.
what, the no parking spaces in the right of way.
No, but I'm talking about the ones in front of your garages.
Until somebody's parked in front of that house and then they can't get out. You see what I'm saying? If you say that you're adding, that people could park there, well, yeah, but then when the resident.
Talking about the
who-
corner, Emily.
No, he's also talking about in front of the
Yeah,
houses.
adding
that
all
that
those
would
parking
add
places.
additional parking to downtown. Until somebody's parked there who's shopping and one of the residents wants to come out and they're blocked in.
Well, yeah, but that's no different from Pine Street, the attorney that has a driveway that gets to his garage. It's the same thing. It's all over town.
You did, okay. Aren't you going to have the same problem? You're having a parking, 20-spot parking at a higher elevation. You're still going to have that same problem getting to those commercial buildings?
No, ma'am. They're going to walk to the commercial buildings. I'm talking about, you couldn't park, you couldn't provide a parking space coming from the back with the grade differential, but this is going to be.
So how do they get to these commercial things down here?
They don't have parking required.
No, I'm saying they're parking here and you're up above. Oh.
It's going to be a rear, a secure.
Seems to me
parking.
if you had that big central thing closer here, these people could park in the back. Maybe
It'd be
not.
10 feet, it'd be 10 feet higher, but the other,
Is this patio?
yes, ma'am. And so, if you looked at the, I guess you see the elevation. It's in your packet, I think. It's just-
Yeah, I saw it.
And then across the street, this is a house directly across the street.
They go down to get.
They go down.
They go down.
It's the
Yeah.
opposite problem, but they go down, but they have a carriage house garage in front of their house. So, I guess, here, this is, you asked about what was across the street.
I think I'd like to table it.
And then this is what's next door. It's already been built.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Okay. This,
That's the new development next door.
Right. that's what's next door, so we want to continue the same thing.
But they park in the rear.
Correct.
Yeah.
With a, I don't have that ever, how does,
I think they come in from the back, don't they?
is that a city right away?
No,
Imagine, I don't know.
No.
it's their property.
That's their property.
Yeah, no. Their access is, so anyway, that's another. How do you, if those are fee simple lots,
They're not, they're
I don't know what
townhomes.
I'm approving.
They're
I'm not approving.
It's a condo.
no, it's not. And it is specifically not a condo.
The white
Deal.
building?
Why don't you ask for more information and just table this and let's get on with it?
Mr. McGowan, would you be opposed for us tabling it so we have more information?
Well, that was the recommendation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so could,
Yes, sir.
I
And,
guess you could request, Buford, could he request that for our board to table it till we get more information?
I think, Mr. Chairman, I think that the staff recommendation, I think the staff recommendation that you have before you right now accomplishes that.
Okay.
Accomplishes that, and I think that Mr. Cowan has just basically just verbalized into the record, that he concurs with the,
Well, it's based on additional engineering was the reason for the.
Yes, sir.
Right. The staff recommended the parking in the front, but especially because of the compatibility across the street and because of the grade differential. And all they asked me for was some engineering to show that that was a necessity. So, and this meets every single central business district requirement as far as fee simple individual townhome lots. These will probably be the most expensive piece of real estate in all of Fairhope when it's built. And that would be a lot better to me if I lived across the street than if I was going to put a dumpster with garbage and truck deliveries there.
So we
Which
have
it
a
could be.
motion.
Yeah, I agree with you, but then again, we need to determine the hardship. What would help, I can visualize what you're saying, because this is what I do for a living, but it would help if you had a section that
Sure.
went east and west, where you have your residential and that
Right.
back parking and, or, kind of have something that's three-dimensional rather than one-dimensional,
Right.
where everybody can see it. That would help out tremendously.
Well, back to the statement about next door, for us to provide access to the rear would not be approved today in the planning and zoning. And so for me to sell these three individual lots as they sold the ones next door, it would not meet planning and zoning requirements within the central business district. So that also is a hardship.
Is the property next door, is that central business district also, or that is not?
Yes.
Yes.
It is. The new development to the left of him is central business district. So do I hear a motion to
Mr.
table it?
Chairman?
Yes.
I move it.
Wait.
I'll move.
Wait,
Move to
I-
table
wait,
it.
hold on, we have a
Bring it back
question.
with
We have a
more
question
detail.
from Kathy.
What?
First and foremost, we did not open a public hearing.
I didn't want.
Okay. So if we table it, do we have to have the
Let's,
It was advertised as a public hearing, so we do need to open it.
Okay.
Now, you can table it with the applicant's consent, which he has given already by his statement.
Okay. Kathy, did you have a question?
no, I was going to make a motion.
Okay. So, Emily, do I need to, if we're tabling it, do we close the public portion of it, or
I
we can
think
still?
he's requesting the table.
Yeah, then it's
Yeah.
not required.
My
This- okay.
request is to table it.
So just to make sure, Mr. McGowan, you are asking us to table this till next month for additional information? Is that, okay, thank you. So do we hear a motion?
I would recommend that we request the variance be tabled for additional study or drawings until next month.
Let me ask you this. Assuming the drawings are here, assuming the drawings represent what we just stated, because, depending on, well, no, that's okay. I understand the type of drawings you want. It's not a hardship to do those drawings.
Table.
So,
It's hours to go.
I have a motion.
The drawings would have to show clearly that you cannot access from the rear. I can see everything you're saying here, but
Yeah.
except that I can't see why access from the rear is not possible because of change in elevation. And I would hope that the drawings you bring next time clearly show that.
Sure, yeah, right. I'll second it.
Okay, so, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously to
Aye.
table. Okay, wait, we've got one more thing, Dick. All right. So is there, any other,
Where's he going?
we're not quite finished.
Sorry, I thought we were done. Well, we got to the end of the page.
Guess what? We're going to have a meeting next month.
Okay.
So have a meeting for next month.
Can you tell us what's on the agenda?
This meeting.
I'm kidding.
You're gonna hear it again.
I hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second.
Aye.
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 See y'all
Thank you.
next month.